Hello, I'm Gaynor Jones and my story in the anthology is called May We Know Them, and the inspiration behind it was actually a tweet. I spent a lot of time on Twitter. Somebody had posed a question and they'd said, people who have children, answer truthfully, do you regret having them? And then the two choices were just yes or no. I have a child, she's 7, and she's my absolute world and I love her to bits. And I wanted her for a long time before I had her. But in that moment, I hovered. I didn't immediately press yes. I didn't immediately press no. It just really got me thinking. The main reason it got me thinking was because of climate change, and climate anxiety is something that wasn't really on my mind while I was trying to get pregnant, and then has been very much on my mind since. I think things have worsened significantly in the last few years. So that's where the story started from. It's about two women living, surviving really in a time at the end of the world, and when choices about whether to have children or not are taken away. I'm quite nervous about people reading it, firstly because it's very personal. It's a lot of it's based on my own experience of wanting a child and thinking that I couldn't have one. Writing a story about a woman who desperately wants a child feels very unfeminist to me. It feels quite an odd thing to have written, but I realised that while I'd written a lot about pregnancy and changes to my body and being a mother and postnatal depression, I hadn't really touched on the time before. I think because it was too painful, I can even feel sort of tears in my eyes now, thinking about how hard it was. The other reason I feel quite sensitive about people reading it is because now I do have a child, so it feels like, should I have explored those issues in fiction about someone really wanting a child and not being able to have one? I don't know. It was just something, I always write my truth, and I suppose it was something that had been at the back of my mind for such a long time to explore and write about. So I did. So I'm interested to see, and a little bit nervous to see what people's reaction to the story will be. But thank you for reading nonetheless.
Hiya, this is Sascha Akhtar here. I am the author of the short story The Last of the Nest Gatherers in the anthology coming very soon from Fly on the Wall Press of Myths and Mothers. I got very interested in the fact that the most expensive food in the world currently is a bird's nest, and it is the nest of the bird known as the Indonesian swiftlet, also Indian swiftlet. It has a few interchangeable names. The nest is made entirely from the bird's saliva, and it takes it a month, an actual month, to make. Now, the art of nest gathering goes back a long time, and these nest gatherers endanger their lives. Because the bird makes its nest right at the top in these caves of these vertical cliffs. So I wanted to imagine what it might look like, this whole industry around the bird's nest, because as you can imagine, if it's the most expensive food in the world, there is a huge industry around it. And in doing so, I suppose I felt a lot of empathy for this little bird, because of course there are some people who have taken it, to a sort of corrupt level where they're taking the birds' nests before the eggs are hatched. And I wanted to sort of look at this and how it might relate to the current day and ecology. A lot of things have happened in the bird's nest sort of gathering industry. There's been mechanization. So I hope you enjoy the story, and looking forward to the reading at Manchester Blackwell's in March.
I recall the origin of Granny Wallop very well, but I can do better than relate it by memory. I'm a keen hiker and journalist of my travels. I can read you an entry from the relevant date of a walk I did whilst holidaying some years ago now in the Yorkshire Dales. Got lost yesterday, following what the guide called a trail into another age. Beware, it warns, the route back into the 21st century can be hard to find. As the sun sank below the higher ridge of a valley, uncharted in said guidebook, I swear, I was most relieved, you might imagine, dear journal, to stumble at last onto a road. Unmade as it was, this would lead me soon enough back to civilization. I was more thankful still to hear, before very much longer, the throaty approach of a motorcycle, then discerned through the gloaming that attached to said motorcycle was a fully enclosed sidecar. I haven't ridden pillion since tangling my beanie's tasselled pom-poms in the gears of Uncle Ollie's tandem on that ill-fated charity ride from Skegness to Pontypridd. I reminisce a little about that escapade. I don't think you need to know about that. No need to flag said motorcyclist down, I continue. She stopped, dismounted, and approached me. I cannot easily put into words, dear journal, the disquiet this old woman, half my height, twice my breadth and depth, inspired in me. Eyes a flicker like two blue flaming halfpennies cast into the hearth, she hobbled around me, speaking in a dialect so impenetrable she might have been speaking in tongues. I'm lost, I told her plainly. Please help. I could see that, she glared, and she came in so close that I could smell the awful supper on her breath. She nodded down road at a ramshackle dwelling I don't know how I'd missed until now. They could stop her at roost, if you like, in with hogs in pig house. Well, does they like? Hop in, she gestured at the sidecar. I didn't dare. I've heard tales of the old women of the dales, nags and crones, wicked stepmothers, cannibals and witches abroad, on old motorcycles. I vaulted the verge and ran back into the hills to meet the sun coming up. I can hear her cackling even now.
Hi, my name's Kenzie Millar, and I'm here to talk a little bit about my inspiration for my story, Pass Through the Waters. So my story involves a selkie, which is an element of Scottish folklore. It's a woman who is part seal, part woman. So rather than a mermaid with half and half in the sea, she is a seal. She then comes out of the sea, sheds her seal skin, and underneath that there is a woman. Obviously, as with anything with folklore, there's different versions of this creature, different versions of the story. But when I was growing up, the main one I heard involved a fisherman who fell in love with the selkie that he met on the beach one night in her woman form. He stole her seal skin, which meant that she was unable to return to the sea, and this forced her into a life with the fisherman. They had, I think, 6 children. One day she discovers in his trunk her seal skin, and immediately she leaves her husband and children and moves back to the sea where her family and her home are. I was always interested in this story and the quite gendered elements, that the man decided he was in love with the woman, therefore he could steal her skin and she would have to stay with him and bear his children. And I really wanted to see how this story could be different, told with a woman falling in love with the selkie, and whether changing the genders would change the way the love was, where permission was granted on both sides and actually both participants chose a relationship despite their differences, despite being human and selkie, and that, I struggled, I think, with when to set the story, where to set the story, and whether to, what point of view to write it. But that crux of the story has always remained the same throughout a few different versions, a few different drafts. So I really hope that you enjoy where the story ended up taking place. The main character, Cass, is someone I'd love to write more about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about her. Thanks. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Helen Nathaniel-Fulton, and I am fortunate enough to have a short story called Memory Chip in Fly on the Wall presses on Myths and Mothers. And I was asked to say a few words to talk about the inspiration for the story. And it came about, I think, in quite an odd way, in that about 10 years ago, I was working full-time and very busy, but short stories came hammering away at me, and I had to write and write. Eventually, about 30 stories had emerged, and they were autobiographical, but in no particular order. They'd come out quite randomly, and I put them in order so they made a little bit more sense when read as a unit. And Memory Chip was one of those stories, written at quite a painful period in my life. I was about 23 and living in West Germany in the late 70s and early 80s, needing to take any job I could find to survive, mostly in factories, but not exclusively, and working alongside some quite desperate folk and at very monotonous, tedious work. I seemed to go into some kind of neutral gear myself, some kind of machine mode. And one of the shocking things is you can not even realize you're pregnant for some time. And this is one of the things that happens in the story and has quite deep consequences for me psychologically and for future life. And I hope that you will find the story enjoyable. I think it's quite multi-layered. But even if you enjoy it just as a short story, a snapshot from someone's life, or if you do find perhaps some extra layers of meaning in it, I hope you find it pleasing.